I just love my girls, and I love my wife, and I just want her to be found.
I am. I believe that if we had had a trial, the community, the people who have been searching for Suzanne, the critics, the suspects, would have seen the truth. They would have seen the truth in this case that was starting to eke out as we were doing and filing different kinds of motions and having hearings in this case. And now we've lost that ability to present the truth. That's what the courtroom is for.
We just know our dad better than anyone else. And we know he was not involved in our mom's disappearance.
I love my girls, and I love my wife.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So just released from the Aiton law firm, this is a quote from their statement. Barry is with his daughters and they are all struggling with the immense shock and grief after learning today that their mother and wife, whom they deeply love, was found deceased. They had faith that their wife and mom would walk back into their lives again. The news is heartbreaking. It's quite interesting how that sentence is framed, that their wife and mom, really, that she would walk back into their lives again. Anyway, goes on, neither the DA nor the authorities notified Mallory and Macy Morphew about the recovery of their mom. Well, presumably they notified Barry. From what we know, Barry is as innocent as he was from day one. DA Stanley and law enforcement got it wrong. We hope the authorities will quickly admit their wrongful persecution of Barry, an innocent man, to treat the Morphews like the victims they are and charge the person or persons responsible for Suzanne's killing. The statement ends there. I don't know if you guys know, but in May, Barry launched a $15 million lawsuit against the, I think the district attorney or against law enforcement. And so this is obviously, they can't just admit that they did something wrong because then they could be sued for that. So it's not just a matter of saying, oh, we made a mistake. Because obviously Suzanne has disappeared. She's been missing for 3 years. She's been missing since Mother's Day on the 10th of May 2020. And someone was responsible for that. It's interesting here that Morphew's slick defense counsel, rather than praising law enforcement for actually finding Suzanne's remains, quite a tall order that in itself, she instead shoots another arrow at them, accusing them of insensitively not letting Barry's daughters know what had happened. Isn't that Barry's job? It's also interesting that Barry has, it appears, chosen to respond to this news of his wife's death and the discovery of her remains, through a criminal defense attorney rather than in person. Before we get to the rest of the analysis, and we do have more information about where Suzanne was found, how she was disposed of, and the state of the remains. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I was in the area, looks like I actually drove through Moffat at some point on my way to the Great Sand Dunes National Park, drove through there and back. And I was sort of in the Salida area as well, driving around. I will be doing a live similar to the one I did last night, probably at a similar time. So look out for that. I'll put a link to that live stream in the description, or you can wait till the end of this episode. If you're finding my analysis useful, meaningful, astute, intelligent analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, I also find it noteworthy that the entire statement only seems to remember that this is likely a murder investigation, unsolved, unprosecuted, unresolved, in the final line of their statement. You would think we want justice for Suzanne. You know, you would think that that would be the first priority. We want to find the person who did this. Instead, that aspect is almost left as an afterthought at the very end of the statement. Now, information about the location of Suzanne's remains has been sparse, but a little bit of additional information has filtered through since we dealt with this last night. The investigation and investigators have been unusually tight-lipped about this. What we do know is that the remains were found scattered and in a shallow grave. According to our information, investigators have revealed they found Suzanne's remains scattered 50 miles from her bicycle, where her bicycle was left, in the area of Moffat, Saywatch, that's the Saywatch County, while they were probing a completely separate case. I would be really interested to know what that case was, what they were looking for. And anyway, she had been buried in a shallow grave, according to the coroner, and her bones had also then been dispersed. So she'd been buried, and probably due to animal activity, scavenging, her bones had been, I guess, unearthed and scattered over the years. What this suggests is that there's very little remaining besides likely skeletal fragments, bones, teeth, that sort of thing. It does seem more likely that her remains were identified via dental records. After months and years out in the open, Suzanne's body seems to have met a similar fate as Brian Laundrie. One also wonders what seasonal impact, this time of year has had on the remains becoming exposed right now. At this time of the year, obviously you wouldn't be able to find them, under snow kind of thing. But given the virtually rural terrain of Moffat, it's a very sort of flat area surrounded by high mountains, but that area itself is very, very flat. There probably has been a high degree of scavenging animals, insects interfering with the remains, which will likely interfere with trying to ascertain specific injuries, cause of death, things like that. It's also unlikely that I think that any biological tissues have survived this long besides hair and perhaps fingernails. Sometimes in the bone that they find marrow, and there is sometimes DNA inside the bone. But I guess that'll be revealed in the fullness of time. So the coroner in the Saywatch, from Saywatch County, Tom Perrin, he said that she was found in just like a dry desert field of sagebrush and a natural grasses south of Moffat. So that is already giving us a better idea of where we're talking about. South of Moffat, which basically means on the far side, on the opposite side of Moffat to where Salida is. You guys would know that Salida is north. Maysville is north of Moffat. In other words, one has a sense that Suzanne was disposed of in an extremely nondescript way. Not even a tree or fence post to mark her grave. Perrin was called to collect her remains on September 22nd, and he told the Denver Gazette that it appeared that her body had been buried in a shallow grave before the remains scattered. So it does seem that the remains were scattered through some kind of natural process. What this means is that it's possible that biological traces may have bonded or deposited somehow in the soil. So you would expect that the investigators would have tried to recover soil samples as well. And one would also wonder, was there any kind of clothing, material, plastic in that sort of shallow site? We have no idea whether Suzanne was buried inside any kind of container, any kind of material. I personally doubt that this site was the original. This is just my view. I doubt that this was the original burial site or the only burial site, but it is clear that a certain amount of time has passed with the remains in this particular area. In a way, I must say I'm surprised that her remains were found to begin with. That a large-ish amount of remains were found. Based on soil samples at the burial site, chemical analysis may indicate how much tissues were in situ to begin with, if there was another site. I do think this is going to be quite a difficult case in terms of the lack of material that the investigators have got to deal with. Perrin was called to the scene to collect the remains on Friday and transported them to El Paso County for an autopsy. And it took until Wednesday for those remains to be positively identified. So it took almost a week, around about 5 days, to positively identify Suzanne's remains. It's very sad to think that this is where and how she ended up. You know, a beautiful 49-year-old woman who was kind of looking forward to the next phase of her life. She was unhappily married, but she was trying to sort of reach out for kind of a second life, a second chance. This is what her life has been reduced to, bones in a windswept field. What do you think of the notion that Barry and his daughter simply expected Suzanne, after 3 years of not using her phone, not being on any of her social media, not accessing her bank accounts, using any of her own finances or funds, not making any contact with family, friends, or even the man that she was having an affair with, that she would simply return to her family as if nothing happened? Doesn't that seem a little bit of a schizophrenic thing to say? That if somebody disappears for 3 years, you think they're just going to materialize out of thin air? Oh, I'm back. I mean, who on earth considers this a reasonable response, given the fabric of text messages? We went through a lot of them towards the end of yesterday's live stream. If you missed it, I'll put a link at the end of this video so you can watch it. We also could see through the sort of just the kind of basic line of those, the basic kind of storyline in those text messages was that there was financial emergency taking place, financial troubles taking place, and also heartbreak. And all of this immediately preceded Suzanne's disappearance in the days, weeks, and months going up to about at least September. And there was also talk that she wasn't terribly happy as long as 2 years before she finally disappeared. Whatever the district attorney in charge does now, it will have to be by the book and no mistakes. But what is in favor of the prosecution this time round is that Barry has played and revealed his hand, and somehow I don't think anyone saw this coming. Maybe that in a way is an asset to the prosecution's case. So I'm not going to take it further than that. I do want to thank those who were part of yesterday's discussion. There's probably a lot more to unpack about this case. One of the statements that was made was that it was just said as a source, was that the fact that these remains have been found so far south of the Morphew home, the Puma Path property, instead of it being on the other side, you would tend to think that that suits Barry Morphew's story and suits his case. Because I think you've got to ask, how are police going to show or prove or demonstrate that Barry had anything to do with the remains ending up where they did? And certainly if you're thinking of it in a very kind of limited box-like manner, if you say, well, when on the day that Suzanne disappeared, could Barry have gone all the way out to Moffat? Well, I think the answer is obviously, well, that he didn't, that he couldn't. And that is why I think one's got to think about it as a multi-step disposal. It wasn't just one single disposal on one occasion on one day. I think it was possibly multiple sites over a period of time. Anyway, we'll see what transpires in terms of law enforcement's information in that regard. I think they've got their work cut out for them. Thank you for listening. Look out for the live stream tonight, and I'll see you guys next time.